titled Mamdani Seals Remarkable Victory, but Real Challenges Await. But it's not the article itself. It's a puff piece, whatever. It's the BBC. But the most notable part is this graphic near the top. That's a quick facts. If you click on the arrow to go to the quick facts tab there, where it tells you when he was born, what he's famous for, political views is the part that I want to highlight. He describes himself as a democratic socialist, which has no clear definition, but essentially means giving a voice to workers, not corporations. Yeah, BBC, right. That's all it means. That is penetrating political insight. Thank you, BBC. Very cool. Democratic socialism is, of course, just, using legalized mob rule for the confiscation of property from other people. And Bernie Sanders says that it's time for Democrats to take Mamdani's message all over the country, reports Breitbart. Mamdani, who had the support, by the way, of billionaire heir Alex Soros, apparently is going to, in Bernie's words, take on the oligarchs. Yeah, it's just typical communist stuff here, you guys. And so I want to move along, though, to the exit polling breakdown, because that's where it starts to get really interesting here. So Mamdani's support came largely, it seems, from newer transplants to New York, as we talked about last week. If you can pull up the chart, not this one, the other one. Yeah. Exit polls illustrate that Mamdani lost among native New Yorkers, which is a little bit crazy to look at there. And Chris, you had a really good op-ed in Town Hall today on the exit polling. What do you make of this stuff?
What stood out to me was voters under 30 voted for him 80%. I think voters under 45, it was near 70%. 6 in 10 NYC renters voted for him. And 7 in 10 of the exit pollees said that their number one concern was the affordability, cost of living crisis. So I know we've kind of already touched upon that, but to his credit, he did make that the central issue of his campaign, and he just hammered it home time and time and time again. He has some really slick social media videos that he produced that resonated with young people especially. It just goes to show that the simple slogans that a socialist spouts, when you don't really think deeply about them and you just take them on their face, they sound really good. And, part of the problem is that we've got a generation of New Yorkers, and this is not just in New York, this is all over this country. And I'm a former teacher, so I know this. They're not being taught the history of communism, socialism. They're not being taught about the reality of free market capitalism or freedom in general. So they have a very warped view of communism. And that, I think, has led them to think, okay, well, it's not so bad. Maybe it, just didn't work out very well in the Soviet Union, but it's still a very, moral, fair, equitable ideology. And the way that he makes it sound so doable, they're falling for it. And obviously it's not going to work. We know why it's not going to work. But for these, ignorant voters, and I don't say that, with malice, they just literally don't know any better. They are voting for, someone who is going to make their lives 10 times worse, not 10 times better.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
There was no one in this campaign who was bringing out any alternative economic program that at all. And so the problem that you have is one person is saying, you can't afford anything and it's these people's fault, and we're going to take money from them and give it to you because those people are evil and they're greedy, and so that's the way it's going to be. And we have that right because this is democratic and this is a democracy, and that's why we will have our socialism. The problem that you have here is that it's not a real fight, because all Cuomo was offering was the same thing that you already have, and there, what he was saying is that this chap will make it worse. But so what? They're willing to take that chance because they don't feel like they have a good situation. They don't feel like they have a chance to succeed, so they're willing to do that. It'll be different when there is some alternative that's offered that has some plausibility to it. So I think this is a really good test of what's going on in the Democrat Party and what's going on the left. I don't think it says much about what's going on in America, except insofar as the things that Barack Obama and Joe Biden fostered and put into place and rolled forward are having their effects. And New York has become a city of immigrants, very much so. Mamdani is right about that. And the question is, can this be rescued? Can New York ever be rescued, or will it simply have to depopulate to some degree, where the productive people are just scourged out, that they leave, and then what's left becomes so radically bad that change ultimately arrives simply through natural processes.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about this, I think last week or the week before. I actually am a native New Yorker. Now, I moved out when I was 8 years old, but I still have a lot of family in the New York area. And then that chart that we had up there before with native New Yorkers, people born in America and born in New York City, they were a minority of the electorate. Only 45% of people who voted were actually born native New Yorkers, and they went 12% plus 12% toward Cuomo. It should have been 90%, but I talked about this the other week. Look, apparently a majority. In fact, there you go. So that chart shows that 10 plus years is as far as it goes. So that's 37. So about half the electorate, half the people who voted on Tuesday for the mayor of New York City were not there during 9/11, let alone have lived there their entire life. The city of New York is now being run by people who just got there. And I know it is supposed to be, it's technically illegal for non-citizens to vote in elections in the United States, including in New York City. But if you've been in the country for less than 5 years, how many of those people, showed up at the polls and voted when they're not actually citizens? We don't know. We will probably never know. But, the city of New York is being run by the people who don't know what New York was, and they're changing it. They're changing it into something else. It's basically now, I thought this was a little extreme when he said it. I was watching a Matt Walsh podcast the other day, and he said New York City is basically a foreign enclave inside the borders of the United States, that it is a foreign city. And that may be a little harsh, but the way the people voted in New York City kind of bears that out, because people who were born in New York City understand that as flawed and terrible as Cuomo is, and Curtis Sliwa, as well, really didn't have a chance, that there's a different outlook upon your city, your country, and in political philosophy and economics and all that stuff, if you were born here than if you were not. So New York City has always been a city of immigrants. My family immigrated through New York City, but it's a completely different kind of immigrant city now.
Yeah, and we've said it before too, but I think it's important to bring this up again. It's really important, I think, if we're going to win on these issues, or we're going to start turning people away from this stuff, that it's not right to be dismissive of the concerns of the young people that are voting this way. Just saying, they're lazy and stupid and they got participation trophies is not going to cut it. Okay. First of all, who gave them participation trophies? They didn't spontaneously conjure those things. That kind of mindset is built into you over time. You're not born with it. But that's, not the point really. I think real clear.
I was going to say, I think that New York City is also pretty representative of what's been happening, at least in my lifetime, with this, wealth inequality, Wall Street doing great, Main Street getting shafted.
Yeah.
And I think that since New York City is the financial capital of the world, and, we saw in the bailouts, we saw Occupy Wall Street, we saw all that stuff, this has been bubbling up under the surface for a very long time. I don't think it's happening in places, in rural places, because there's not that stark inequality that there is so in your face in New York City, where, a CEO of a bank, has a, $100 million penthouse, and the person who's driving the bus can barely afford their tiny little like apartment. So I think in a place like New York City, these issues are exacerbated for many reasons too. Like Jim was saying, New York City is pretty hardcore when it comes to affordable housing requirements and not allowing permits and these over licensing requirements and all this kind of stuff. So I think in a place like New York City, where the government intervention has already been so just so dramatic, the people think, well, the only solution is for more government intervention. And they almost can't even fathom the fact that, it's so hard for us to articulate this kind of argument. Actually, you'd be much better off if the government let you have just more freedom. And, it's sort of counterintuitive in a way, and it
right.
Like Sam said, this has been building, since the Obama years with the life of Julia and all that kind of stuff, where you're not capable of making your own healthcare decisions, so allow us to do it for you. It's that mentality that I think is really taken hold in places like New York City. And once again, the kind of ignorant people, I don't mean that they are stupid. I mean that they are not being educated, in public schools, and especially with social media and the mainstream media clouding, their judgments on this. They think that this actually is a viable solution when we all know that it is far from a viable solution.
Yeah, because I'll tell you what they hear. I'll tell you what they hear when you say things like, well, if there was less government or if you just left it up to the free market. We know what we mean by that. And we know, the articulation of those points is a little bit deeper than what you can put on a bumper sticker. But what they hear, what they think of when they hear you say that is, oh, so we're just going to let these corporations that are just crushing us continue to do that with no holdbacks whatsoever then.
When in reality, where they go, big government and big corporations, are like two peas in a pod. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Right. But that's where their brains go, even if they're wrong. And Real Clear Politics.
But that's because of the public school. But I think that a lot of that is because of the public schools situation, Linnea, where I witnessed this for many years, and it got so frustrating. I told myself, I don't want to be in this, this environment anymore, where I feel like I'm the only one who is offering truth and honesty and both sides of the story here. So I mean, I've written about this. I was persona non grata. Everyone looked at me like you are the one who is actually dispelling these myths that we are trying to implant in these students' minds, and they did not like me because of that.
Yeah.
I think it's important to consider the fact that many of the people who voted for Mamdani are immigrants who did not attend American schools. So it's a combination of things. And I think that New York City is going to become, and is certainly becoming, sort of like the Hong Kong to our China, only the opposite politically, where it is so different from the rest of the country, or the let's say the California to our China, but it's so different to the rest of the country, to the rest of the country, that it's really going to start to separate in terms of whether they even consider themselves to be Americans.
But it's not just New York City, Sam. It's also in Chicago. We've got Brandon Johnson, who is also basically a socialist. We've got the same thing happening, in cities across California. LA, obviously, Karen Bass is, basically a socialist. And although the socialist candidate lost in Minneapolis, the fact that the socialist candidate is even, within like a spitting distance of that race is just crazy to me. Katie Wilson, also in Seattle. I don't know if that race has been called yet, but she was neck and neck too. So I think this is sort of symbolic of the difference between the suburban and rural, mindset versus this, urban mindset, and especially on both coasts.
Yep,
that's absolutely true. Part of what the progressive movement arises when America became industrialized and urbanized. As people moved off the farms and farms mechanized and they became more efficient, and you had less labor in rural areas, America went from a nation of farms and villages to a nation of cities. Now, and politically, we went New Deal and lots of wars during that era. And then we suburbanized. And so what happened is you got a strange balance there, where you had a very hard left approach coming from the cities, but it's moderated within the suburbs. So you had a sort of a balance there. It's interesting to look at what might happen with new technology and in communications, and also in transportation. And given what happened during the lockdowns, where people became less attached to central cities, it's very possible that America could become more of a nation of villages again. If that were to happen, that will change our politics entirely, and I would say for the better. Because
Yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
The free busing is going to save the cities. You're totally wrong about that.
I want to go to Eann on this, but first I want to read a little bit from what Real Clear Politics points out here. They say, even though all of his Marxist answers are wrong and immoral, Zohran laser focused on the issue that mattered most to voters, especially to the younger ones. Most young citizens have not benefited from the huge run-up in asset prices in recent years. Without substantial holdings of equities or real estate, they struggle to deal with sky-high costs for the staples of life. Even worse, the job market gets substantially tougher for young adults, adding even more angst. These voters correctly blame the Democrats for the pain of Bidenomics, but that answer has now shifted to Republicans, fair or not. Right now, per TIP Insights polling, only 24% of young adults rate Trump's performance as good or excellent on economics, and 54% rate it as poor or unacceptable. Mamdani smartly drove into this issue. All of his alleged solutions will only make inflation worse, of course. From the free public transit to lavish benefits for illegals. But regardless, he fixated on what matters to young voters. So they do blame Democrats, which is why they didn't turn out for Cuomo. They're desperate for something different than the boilerplate from either party, which have simply not delivered for them, they feel. And so radicalism is what you get. Eann, I'm sure that you're conservative. I'm conservative. You used to not be so conservative, but I'm sure you still have friends who are either kind of apolitical or maybe even a little bit on the left if they're not, too mad at you for being conservative now. But I imagine, a young apolitical person feels just swallowed up. He's living in New York. He feels swallowed up. He's drowning in debt. He's living in a shoebox with 3 other roommates. He lives in a Democrat city and he sees that it's bad. So he turns to Republicans and they say, well, what you should really do is move to a small town where there are fewer job opportunities and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're just not working hard enough. And then he sees someone like Mamdani who says, actually, there's an injustice and here are ways I will address those things. So what's more appealing to a, not well-educated possibly, or, overeducated, even worse, miserable, desperate person?
I think it's like beyond education. It's really who has something to offer. And I would just like to say it's easy to blame young people. I mean, I was previously a democratic socialist, right? It's easy to blame young people saying that, oh, you guys are all brainwashed. Your teacher is insane. Your classmates are Marxists. But then we got to recognize that despite all the brainwashing that is happening within public schools, the reality of the world is that it's getting harsher for us young people. So the real world is actually confirming all of these biases that we receive in schools. And then also I would like to add that, how we were talking about how Zohran and AOC, they're in the same boats. But I would also like to say that I think Zohran's a little different. Because Zohran, in a way, he revolutionized populist politics on the left. Because when you think of AOC, you think of Hakeem Jeffries, the folks on the, what do they call it, the squad, right? They essentially have lost credibility in 2024 because Bernie, basically, he's just like, he's been exposed for long enough. He's been saying the word, he's been using the word oligarchy since 1984, and then AOC, for those who know, she's just someone who runs her mouth. But really, Zohran, I think what he did so well, and Jim put it perfectly by comparing him to Obama is that Zohran, his ability, like his charm and his ability to understand his voters. Like, we're not talking about a demographic enough. It's that the demographic who voted for Trump before and now are voting for Zohran. I know a lot of people who are like that. Like, they might not be like apolitical, they might not be totally left-leaning, and then they're open-minded, they're in the middle. They voted for Trump because under Biden it was terrible. But now for Trump to say on Fox News the other day that the whole economy is doing well, like, as much as I love to wear my MAGA hat, I have to say that, like, big tech are really laying off people. Like, I'm very lucky Heartland Institute hired me, but so many of my friends, I can name more friends of mine who graduated, who are still looking for a job, than people who are like me, who are hired by Heartland, and then I even get to be on this podcast, which is awesome. But I just want to add that, like, Zohran, he really ran the perfect campaign. Like, I got to give it up to him. And Cuomo, his whole identity is that I am not Zohran. I am not crazy. But then young people hated the most. And if anything, the 2024 election proves it best. Like, Kamala for the whole time was saying, I am not Trump, vote for me, I'm not Trump. But no one cares anymore when you are suffering. So, yeah, as a young person, we got to realize that Zohran, he ran the perfect campaign. And then the reality, the American dream is getting harder for the younger generation.
The American dream is getting harder for the younger generation. As Sam knows, if you really want to go to the genesis of it, when we came off the gold standard and we just started printing money willy-nilly, the main driver of the inflation, whether it's housing inflation, energy inflation, all these, is that you've got the government borrowing tons of money and printing it to cover their, and it's happening at the local level in New York City. It's happening at the state level in New York. It's happening at the local level here in Chicago and at the state level here in Illinois. Obviously, the federal government's the only one that can print the money. But until we really just get to the bottom of that, that core, issue, we are really just fiddling with the edges here. Donald Trump obviously cannot turn inflation around and the cost of living around in 9 months. I mean, that's a joke. It's going to take years and years for his policies to actually, take root and for those to actually produce positive results. So, we've also got to be really, really patient here. And I think that the younger generation, and not to really, sit here and hate all day on the younger generation, but they are not patient. They are all about instant gratification. And, part of the American dream is about thinking long-term and saying, okay, I'm going to work real hard. I'm going to save. I'm going to live, within my means for many, many years in order to build up that nest egg to buy that house. A lot of young kids, and, I'm somewhat guilty of this myself. Not only can we not do that, but we just don't have that mentality right now.
The subject Eann brought up and that Chris has elaborated on is extremely important. Now, what I'm about to say is not going to win anybody any votes, but it's important for us in strategizing how to educate the public about the current situation, and in particular the affordability crisis. There's something called the Gini coefficient. It goes from 0 to 100, and it measures inequality in a society. In the United States, the Gini coefficient has been between 40 and 42 out of 100. So a very strong, very narrow band for 32 years. Inequality has not been rising in this country statistically.
It decreased during Trump's first term.
Right, it absolutely did. So something different is going on here. It's not strictly about the economy itself. There's something cultural going on here. And I think that that's a very interesting thing for us to pursue as a think tank and for all of us as voters and good Americans, which is that there's something cultural going on. And Mamdani, although he ran on a very strong, smart approach, affordability, just keep talking about that. There was also a very strong cultural element to it, and he did not back down from that. And he's made that very, very explicit and powerful, even in his acceptance speech. So one of the things that's been going on here is that these social issues have been rising in importance again. And I think that, you certainly have to answer the affordability crisis, but we have to figure it out first. Figure out exactly what's going on when the statistics don't show that there is in fact a big increase in economic inequality in the country. What is happening there? Is it just New York City, Northern Virginia, places where people get laid off? As the Tip O'Neill said in the 1980s, all politics is local. And he was referring to congressional races and even presidential contests. If that's the case, then that's something where you're going to have to do it on a case-by-case basis. You're going to have to get some people in New York who understand what's really going on there and will work to find solutions to it. But on the national level and on the level of who controls the Senate, who controls the House of Representatives, it's going to be very different. When you have people in Iowa, and Chris mentioned the rural people who don't see as much inequality as you do in New York City. How much of this is perception? How much of this is reality? What is reality that is not good? We need to fix, but you need to figure out exactly what is wrong before you can attend to it.
Sam,
so I think that this is a very interesting and important subject.
All right,
Sam,
hang on. I want to get Ian. Hang on.
Okay.
Yeah, so something I would like to add is that I forgot to mention when I said Zohran, he revolutionized this extremist politics, is that the element Sammy says missing is populist politics. And he took it on to the next level. And then more than that is that actually, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but Zohran, like out of everyone in the Democratic Party, he's the least annoying to me. Just because he's not like, when you think of typical Democrats, they think of a Trump supporter like me, they're going to be like racist, sexist, all of those rants, right? But Zohran, he does not do that. Like he's not condescending. And he actually, when he went on Flagrant, which is a very big podcast, hosted by Andrew Schultz, a comedian, all young people watch it. When he went on that podcast, and just a heads up, everyone on that panel voted for Trump. And he wasn't like being very judgmental. He wasn't trying to say that, yeah, like you guys are wrong, right? Ha ha ha. He was saying, I understand why you voted for Trump. I understand why we lost your support. And I think that's something he did so well. And I just think that it's this time, like we as Republicans, and then of course Democrats, like people in politics, we have to sometimes take accountability. Like you can't just blame voters for voting for the crazy candidates. Like if they're so crazy, then how come they're not voting for you, right? And I would just like to say that there's like the rights right now is not very united. And then I think this election result is a result of like very motivated left-leaning voters, and then like a kind of disgruntled Republican base. And just like Chris said it, like a lot of us, we want to see instant gratification. We want to see like mass deportations. We want to see all of this just like happen by Donald Trump's magical pen that he signs executive order with. But yeah, we got to be more patient. But at the same time, Republicans got to reflect on, have they really been keeping in touch with the populace, with the public? Because Zohran did that so well. And then as much as I think he's a villain, he deserved to win.
Yeah, well, I don't, yeah. So Real Clear points out two other points that I really want to grab real quick here. And that is basically what you just said, which is that one, he's massively charismatic and he has media skills, which is more than AOC, more than any of those people. It might be trained. He might, have taken 1 million speaking and acting classes and stuff, but it doesn't matter because it comes across as normal. It comes across as, genuine, even if it's evil, right? And they also point out that he had an incredible moment during the July debate when the candidates were asked where they're going to visit after they're elected mayor of New York City internationally to give their support to international causes. All of them said they'd go to Israel and Ukraine and stuff like that. And Mamdani was the only one who said he was not going to go anywhere. He was going to stay in New York. Think about that for a second. I mean, that's wow. totally playing to the populist. I mean, that's an extremely popular position for young people right now, is the non-interventionism, at the very least, even, almost isolationist in some cases. No wonder he got the young vote with moments like
Linnea,
that.
I think we've also got to address the fact that he was anti-Israel and basically pro-Palestine and pro-Hamas, and that unfortunately is a very trendy thing in New York City these days. But just if I could go back to what Sam was saying earlier about the culture, in New York City, and I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, the breakdown of the family is a big problem. And one of the things that happens when you have a breakdown of the family, at epidemic levels like it is in New York City, people rely on government. They don't rely on each other. And that's a huge reason why I think as someone like Mamdani is able to sell the socialist snake oil, because people think it's like, I'm all on my own. I have no one I can count on. I don't have neighbors I can trust and that can help me out if I need, something, or family I can trust and help out if I need something. But the government, they're always there. They always will, have my best interest at heart. And we know that is the complete opposite.
Yeah, I want to, Eann, I was very happy that Eann complimented me, that I said something that resonated with him. And I want to return the compliment because Eann did the same thing. In fact, he stepped all over my notes. I had all these things I was going to say. But so maybe just to wrap up this little section of the thing, Kamala ran on, I'm not Trump, stop Trump. Biden did that too. I'm the only guy who can beat Trump. Mamdani, like it or not, gave people a positive reason to vote for him, not just against somebody else. Trump did that, of course, too. In fact, in 2024, Trump got more minority voters, Democratic voters, and young voters, especially young men of all races, because he focused on the failures of the Biden administration, especially economically. And so now the economy may be getting better, as Chris alluded to, but people don't feel it. They really don't. And it may take a while for Trump's economic plan to bear fruit. I mean, the tariffs could be in jeopardy. They just talked about that in the Supreme Court yesterday, I believe. But as Eann pointed out, young people don't feel like the American dream is available to them anymore, and haven't for a very long time. And they also feel, not without justification, that the economy is rigged against them. That they're not, and they're not wrong to feel that way. I mean, try to convince them, and you can't, because it just hasn't worked for people under the age of 30 or even 40. And so that slowly starts to burn and build up resentment in the kind of thing where you see what Mamdani said in that victory speech, where there was a lot of anger still, and there's enemies to target in that speech. All of that is part of this whole thing. And this is, I wouldn't say dangerous politics, but people who don't want socialism need to wake up and start messaging toward people who have legitimate reasons to think the economy is rigged against them.